The Brooklands Concorde was the first British production Concorde, the third built in the UK.
This is this.
Golf Bravo Bravo Delta Golf, or Delta Golf as she's affectionately known, opened the door for Concorde to enter passenger service. Like every other Concorde, over 30% of Delta Golf's airframe was built here at Brooklands before being shipped to Filton for final assembly. In the hands of test pilots Brian Trubshaw and Peter Baker, Delta Golf first took to the sky on February 13, 1974, at the start of a test programme that would lead to Concorde's airworthiness certification. The first flight, which lasted 1 hour and 45 minutes, saw the aircraft fly from Filton to the Concorde test base at Fairford to join Concorde 002 and Concorde 01 in the British flight test programme. Delta Golf flew to many locations all over the globe, such as Singapore, Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, during a flight test programme that lasted more than 7 years. She was the first Concorde to carry 100 passengers at twice the speed of sound. Delta Golf was used by British Airways crews for training in the summer of 1975. Over 50 training flights were conducted out of Fairford before passenger services commenced the following year. The aircraft's final flight came on Christmas Eve 1981, after which she was put into long-term storage at Filton. British Airways acquired ownership of Delta Golf in 1984 and in 2003 offered her to Brooklands Museum for restoration and display. Inside and out, the aircraft had been stripped of just about every conceivable part, but with BA's enormous Concorde spares holding, it was hoped that most parts could be found and eventually refitted. The aircraft was repositioned to allow it to be divided into 5 major sections, after smaller items such as the intakes and wingtips had been removed and transported to Brooklands. The Brooklands built forward and aft fuselage sections were the first major pieces to arrive at the museum in May 2004. A few weeks later, the 2 main wing sections were separated from the fuselage and transported the 125 miles to the museum. The final piece to be moved was the central fuselage section of Concorde, on which the restoration would be based. It was transported along the M4 and arrived safely at Brooklands after journeying down the leafy Surrey roads towards the museum. Hundreds of museum supporters, as well as His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent, were present to greet Concorde and see her being unloaded. Although it would be many months before structural rebuilding got underway, the volunteer team set to work restoring key parts of the aircraft, such as the droop nose and intakes, as well as beginning to remove 20 years of grime from the fuselage and wings ahead of repainting. The museum's contractors for the rebuilding started work in early 2005. The first task was to reposition the 5 main sections so that they could be reattached. When the aircraft was sectioned, new production joints were essentially formed. Aluminium channel sections were used to rejoin both the wings and fuselage. Alongside the structural work, the main volunteer effort got underway to repaint the aircraft. The surface was prepared before being painted with the trademark Concorde gloss white finish. After the forward fuselage had been rejoined, volunteers refitted Concorde's famous droop nose. With the structural rebuild nearly complete, Concorde was airbagged to full height to allow the landing gears to be fitted, the first time in nearly 20 years that the aircraft had rested on its own undercarriage. A volunteer team refitted the outer wingtips in late 2005, painstakingly installing over 600 bolts to hold them in place. With work underway to restore the interiors and cockpit, the volunteer effort in 2006 began with refitting the restored air intakes and rebuilding the engine bays. Special teams were formed to repaint and then fit the giant Brooklands-built tail fin, which was fitted in the summer of 2006, topping out the main rebuilding programme. Due largely to the efforts of an army of dedicated volunteers, sponsors and contributors to the museum's appeal fund, a Concorde with an uncertain future at the start of the millennium had been saved for future generations.
Okay guys, come forward now please. Right, I'll see you to the video guys.